is played in the unconscious. A myth that extends over centuries, namely archetypal ideas, a stream of archetypal ideas that goes on through one individual through the centuries. It is like a continuous stream, and that comes into the daylight in the great movements. Say in political movements or in spiritual movements, for instance, in the time before Reformation, people dreamt of the great change, and that's the reason why such great transformations could be predicted. If somebody has been clever enough to see what is going on in people's mind, in the unconscious mind, would be able to predict it. All the time, a myth is played in the unconscious.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to another Webster report on this. On Sunday, the 21st of December, shortest day of the year, apparently, allegedly, depending on what calendar, but it's certainly darker than, it has been getting darker, and it's certainly gone quick today. So we started off with a bit of, it's a bit like what we've been talking about before, where these myths are put into society, where they're perpetuated, and they're coming through families and bloodlines that have always been. This is why we have a certain set of caricatures and all these myths that grow up through our families. So we're seeing that these particular bloodlines that are, either playing a nice little bit of theatre around us, and they're all acting, but they're all fighting at the same time. We don't know, but this is where I think it's getting interesting now, Alex, because we're not just seeing the psychological and the spiritual coming together, showing the spiritual is where the battle's being fought, and it's being played in the psychological, in the mental, and we can see it playing out right in reality now. It's almost like, when we were talking about the time, the quickening, where time's speeding up, it's almost like all those three elements are coming together. It's almost like there's an ending to this. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's funny because stories, I've not mentioned stories for a while, and I've pointed out in the past that when people think of story, they think of fiction. But you could tell the story of Manchester United's defeat to Aston Villa today, and it's a factual story. They lost 2-1. There's a certain sequence. I didn't watch the game. I don't follow football that much. But there's a story in there. And then within that overarching story, there's all these characters, and then the media, the press, they focus on individual players, and each player's got their own story, their own dramas, like the personal life might get exposed in media, or if they have an attitude with the manager or a spat with another player, or one of them's off form, it becomes a saga. And literally, simple things like that can become really big stories which capture our attention. And I think that's one of the things about stories. They are everywhere. They can be used in a very, very positive and productive way, or they can be used in a very negative way, so people start becoming voyeurs and spectators, really interested in the little details of a football game. And then you get, Mark Goldbridge, the United stand, and he's got millions of subscribers, and people follow him all the time as he gives a commentary. And then that's another level of story and narrative and belonging. People start to become part of a community. And so you can see that even trivial stories can be made into really big deals that can become distraction. So, yes, stories can be positive. And, as we keep pointing out time and time again, regardless of the story about the state of the world, we've also got a story about redemption, salvation, God's economy of salvation, and what his plan is from the beginning right until the end. So, yeah, there's a story unfolding. Or we can look at it on many different levels, with people where we don't have an overarching spiritual story. And people really have to make a decision about how far they want to align with what stories they find most appealing, most accurate, most true to life. And it is amazing how often people get sidelined on trivial stories, really. But, you know, even things like Coronation Street, you know, which I didn't even know it was still going. I'm that far removed now from regular mainstream television. I had to ask someone a few weeks ago, is Coronation Street still going? Well, that tells us, you know, people sit at home, they've watched it since the 1960s, many people. It's like a saga of all these lives that are clearly fictional. But the reason that people tune in, a bit like with reality TV, is because you see people doing things, getting up, having breakfast, having dramas in the relationships, going to work. And yeah, of course, dramas tend to be exaggerated, larger than life. And so, you know, it's not a perfect overlap. But this is this thing that Jung's talking about as well. You know, a lot of these stories are ancient. They're encoded in our unconscious. They're unfolding all the time. And we're a part of them. You know, we're acting them out. And even when we try to resist them, in some ways, we're still acting out a different version of that story. And so in a way, we're all just like walking agents, walking stories, try to decide what step we want to take next. And based on how we interpret the overarching story, we'll hopefully align with that and do something productive. But equally, you know, we've got 8,000 million people on the face of this terra firma. And, you know, if you've got several billion of those just treading water, that might not end up, you know, serving us very well. And so people in positions of power, you know, they're able, as we've seen time and time again, they're able to manipulate and get us to buy into stories that are really not particularly relevant.
But with those programs that you were talking about, the ones who've watched Corrie since the 60s, you know, which would have been my mum right up until she passed. The thing is, my mum wasn't around to see this, you know, that, you know, how woke it became, how, you know, that this girl can be identifying as a cat. And it's you people who question that are going on being put on diversity courses. My mum would have been, what is that all about? And my nan would have been going, what's happened to society? Society's gone mental. What do you mean you had to go to Supreme Court to find out what a woman was? You know, this is ridiculous. I mean, it's a bit pertinent today because today, which is the shortest day of the year, solstice, whatever, you know, the pagans want to put on it, it was a birthday of my uncle's who fought at Dunkirk. He was fighting against what we are now being promoted, what we are being ushered into. You know, this is like beyond what we've seen in the past. We've seen little things here, there, and everywhere, but it's been like musical statues. We've not seen them move. But now they don't care. They don't even care if you're seeing them move, Alex. But what's happening is from those hard-working, hard as nails, you know, spittoon type backstreet pubs where they're all that, you know, salt of the earth with a bit of the odd crim here and there. We went into overdrive. You know, we're one little Yorkshire village has, you know, 3 plane crashes on it, serial killers, all this kind of stuff, and yet they're still advertising it as a lovely little village to visit with genuine pub lunch. All that was like, you think, was just, you know, it was just play acting stuff. But where did it start to become serious enough where reality, or should I say, yeah, reality reflects what's in these programs rather than the other way about? Do you, because I mean, I used to always be watching, I was one of the TV generation, but you know, when you've only got 4 channels and then 5 channels and it's crap and it finishes at 10:30 anyway, you think, well, there's got to be more to life than this. So you end up going out and doing other things. When I first went to America and there was all these hundreds of channels on cable TV, and I'm watching months in advance, Airwolf, 18, Knight Rider, you come home and you've got, I've seen this, I'll go out and do something else. So it was like a big premonition of what was,
Yeah.
you know, when I look back, it was a big premonition what was coming into the future. And I think it's, you know, when you look at the patents that these institutions that have controlled society, it's patented as a psychological weapon. It's a program. We've got to start understanding what reality we've been birthed into, because we rely a lot on the people that we know love us and care the most, and they've been here longer, so we put a lot of trust in. We then are supposed to question things, but when we can't question things, we've got an issue. And if you've not noticed, there's a lot of people going to jail for questioning things, or even praying outside certain places or in the vicinity of. This is like these are witch trials in reverse. We've learned nothing, Alex. So where do you think this tipping point is? I mean, I see it. But we see a lot of hypocrisy. You see, just recently, Tommy Robinson's doing what Tommy Robinson does, and then he pops up in Dubai talking to Muslim groups, taking Muslim hospitality, has a bit of a tete-a-tete with a boxer who's over there, and you think, what am I watching? What is the real truth about this world? We just have to take all this information and go, yeah, still don't know what's going on.
Yeah. Well, I think you've hit on an important point, right? I don't think there's a simple answer that people are going to cotton on to anytime soon. Maybe if they watch this podcast, pull their ears back, then maybe that might help them. And hopefully that's not an arrogant claim. I think the thing is, sources are everywhere. Just talk about journalism. And sources purport to deliver information that presumably is considered useful, or at least an accurate picture about the world. But, hopefully as well, not just an accurate picture about the world, but useful to us, something that we can do something with. The problem is, as with politics, people have become disenfranchised, so they just see a bunch of actors out there, and they seem to have to make a choice between the claims that they make. We all know that the manifestos don't mean anything. They all stand up, say some drivel, and then it doesn't matter what they've said because they just change it afterwards. And that's a symptom. That's actually a very clear symptom of what's happened in Western politics in terms of participation of people. The media aid and abet these characters, whether it's Tommy Robinson or whoever it is, or David Icke or whatever, whatever side of the fence they're supposed to be on, mainstream or alternative, they just become another source. Now, the problem with that is we sometimes say, or often say actually, that we should test all sources and all claims. But we've got to ask what that actually means in practice. Does it mean just having a bit of like mental gymnastics in your own head about that and researching some other voices that say something different and then just getting more confused? There's still a problem, there's a disconnect, because people aren't participating. People are sitting like grand voyeurs watching content. I mean, technically, this is content, so people can tune in every Sunday if they want and watch content. And they can go, oh, I got me fix of content. I think it's better content than the other stuff that a lot of other people are watching. So, yeah, I'm watching better content. Still there? I
am. I can hear you, mate, but I don't know what's happened there. Well, hang
right,
on.
well, I'm being booted out. I'm into the studio. Oh, I were back. Right, yeah. So basically, with that content, it's like, well, all right, then. How are you going to test it? So everyone's life is like an experimental test tube. Everyone's life is like an experimental test tube. And all these sources are just things that we can put into this test tube. But if you get tons of them in this test tube, that could be confusing, especially if you're not present in the test tube. If you just become a passive container, if you just become a recipient of news items and sources and stuff, and they're all swirling around in this test tube, and somehow you're hoping that life is going to be produced like a test tube baby might, and suddenly I'll have the answer, a eureka moment, and then suddenly everyone will do the same, and then spontaneously the world will change. You're missing some vital information there. It's a fantasy, it's a myth. So your life is a crucible or a test tube of all these sources that come in. but you're an active participant in your own life. Well, I say that you are if you are. If you're not, then you're not. So if you're not active, you'll be exclusively passive, and passive things get shaped. Active things actually shape things. So the problem with the media culture at the moment, and what most people are doing, is they feel disempowered. Because they feel disempowered, they're looking for answers, and they want to find the answers outside of themselves. And this is where Christian theology and even the church, even when it talks legitimately about the Bible as the true source, if a person just wants to read words, well, that sounds good. That sounds better than the other stories. Oh, I'm sort of cool with that. I've got better stories in my test tube now, in the biblical stories, and did they write biblical stories? And the answer is still, like, well, so what? What are you doing with that? How are you testing that? How are you proving that? If Jesus made a claim about life, if Jesus talked about bearing good fruit, what the hell does that mean? So somewhere along the line, what's happened is people have just kind of fallen asleep. Even those people who are aware about the state of the world, if they're just passive, if they're just digesting sources and information, they're going to get more confused, because you can't test things just in your head. And we don't have enough people who are going out, pushing the envelope, taking risks, and actually using their imagination to lead a life that's not just crammed into this test tube. People need to get out, and they need to start deciding what they stand for, why they stand for that, and they need to start building positive culture with people who are close to them, who are also doing the same. If we don't do that, we're all part of the problem.
I think Dinny raised a point about in the chat room. I don't know if you can see the chat room, Alex, but Dinny raised a point about are we all born sheep? Well, we've all got the potential to be born sheep, especially we could be willing sheep by just accepting what certain information is, what we've been taught. Work hard, pay your bills. Everybody does that. All right, that must be okay. I won't bother thinking about it because there's nothing you can do. So there, at that point, I'm a willing sheep to go along with what everybody else is. But along the way, I've stopped and gone, hey, excuse me, do you not think we should be doing this? And people are bleating and hitting you as they walk past you, you knobhead, because you're asking questions. So it's at that point, when you get enough of the sheep bleat at you, all of a sudden you recognise yourself as not quite part of this flock. So what flock am I in? Do I need to flock off and look somewhere else for this? Because if everybody's doing something, it doesn't make it right. And it doesn't make it the truth either. So again, we've got these myths that we get perpetuated through our bloodlines. They start with little nothingness, tooth fairies, Christmas, all this kind of stuff, all these little tidbits that we think there's nothing wrong. And I don't know how you, because I think when you're in it, it's so hard to see. It's so hard to see, Alex, when you're doing, before something rocks your world and it directs your attention somewhere else, all you are working for is your family, not just for yourself, but for your family, for your friends, for good things in life. These are the things that we're taught. We're not taught anything different. Once upon a time, the spiritual side of things would just be second nature. Talking about spiritual sides, talking about not demonic possession as in demons just possessing somebody, but as in influence, as in demonized, all that kind of stuff because of traumas or rituals that they participated in. So many people I know who've done spell casting and things like that. Oh, but the good spells, the good witches, the white witches, all, I've heard it all. And then I've heard all the religions as well, because I've not only sat through many of them, but I've researched them because I've always wanted to know, well, somebody must know what happens after this life. And you can't just throw your eggs into one basket, because we see time after time after time again how many times that man gets this wrong. we've got to. I think it comes down to humility, and I don't know if many people can be humble until they're humbled, Alex. And that pride is like smacked straight out of them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you might think this is a bit odd. I mean, no one in the audience is going to know what I'm talking about initially. But Michael Heiser?
Yes.
His particular take on Psalm 82?
No.
The counsel of the divine gods that he talks about, and he connects it with Deuteronomy 32. And what he does. Yes. Yeah. So obviously, he talks about most Christians and most contemporary Western people look back and they just go, well, why is there sin and evil in the world? And they go, just because of the fall. And they stop there. They go, it's just the fall. Yeah. But then, obviously, he develops this tripartite, three-part system, where then in Genesis 6, we see the Nephilim, the watchers, the ones who transgress their domain that we read about in Enoch. So then, obviously, after that, not only were, first of all, from Eden, humans were banished, because obviously they chose to follow what the serpent suggested. So they broke connection with their creator, but they were just basically banished. And then after the watchers and the multiplication of evil, because these fallen ones came down and corrupted humankind, evil became widespread, so that then you have the flood story, that humanity had to be wiped out, and God was grieved that he made humanity, but he rescued Noah. And then ultimately, so it's trying to mitigate, wipe out the evil. And then afterwards he said, I'll never do that again. I'll never destroy the earth with flood. So we'll kind of start again. So it's almost like Eden Part 2. And then reissues them, be fruitful and multiply. It gets reissued. Okay, we started again. And then they start, spreading out. And then they come to Nimrod. And they decide that instead of obeying God, they want to develop reputation, a city, and a tower going up. So at that point, God separates the nations, including like with the Chinese, and we've seen it with the Chinese glyphs and the characters, and it's there encoded in the Chinese characters, the story of Eden. So God's left his marks everywhere. But obviously then, after Babel, in Genesis 11, and everyone split and divided, Deuteronomy 32 talks about that and what God's doing, and it refers to it. But basically, God sets apart his special people. And then in Genesis chapter 12, after Genesis 11, where the account of Babel is, God calls to Abram, Ur of the Chaldees, takes this guy who's in his 90s and his wife who's barren, and he says, no, this is going to be my people, this is going to be my lineage. And we then know that Messiah comes through that, Jesus comes through that. But all the other nations are appointed to be under other deities. So when you look at Daniel 10 and the Prince of Persia, these are like demonic forces and spiritual forces that have control and power over countries. Say again, pal.
Sorry, I forgot about the lag. I said, yeah, they're the principalities.
Say again, Paul.
I said that when you were saying about those energies over the Prince of Persia, they're the principalities. You've got the Prince of Persia and you've got the king, the power behind the throne.
Yeah.
Go on, sorry.
Yeah, so basically, all those other nations are who weren't a part of the covenant that God made with Abraham, who became Abraham. Basically, they are all under the supervision of other powers, and they're powers that can keep people, if you like, in a box. And that's what basically, in terms of salvation history, God then sets apart his special people. There's already been some comments about the Jews. This is fun, preempting Taylor turning up. And obviously selects that people to be a special set apart people, and it looks like in the Old Testament a lot of the time people say, oh, it's really trivial that you mustn't make a garment with two different types of thread or cloth. But it seems to reflect, even though that sounds trivial, the problem seems to be, from God's perspective, is when you mix stuff together. You know, you can't have God and a little bit of the occult. You can't have so much truth and then these errors as well. And so in Kings and Chronicles and Samuel, these books, you get these accounts of people, and the kings are making, you know, they're allowing altars and high places that mix Baal worship with Yahweh and idols and stuff. And they have these local practices. It's like, no, it's not on. Israel is supposed to be set apart. So it's like you can't have two certain types of material in the same garment. It's got to be one thing. It's got to be pure. It's got to be separate. And it looks as if the real problem is that in all these other nations, they have just been taken hostage under all these other powers, because it's like God divorced humanity at Babel. Prior to that, he'd had a plan. There's Adam and Eve. No, if listen to the serpent, so they lose contact with God in terms of fellowship. Then the Watchers, the Nephilim, evil increases even more. God has to use a flood to get rid of it. So that's strike 2. And then again, reissue this be fruitful and multiply. And they say, no, we're not doing that. We're going to have a city. We're going to build ourselves high repute. We're going to build a tower to heaven. We're going to make our own way. We want our access to the gods and to make them in our image rather than the other way around. And then God said, enough is enough. This whole project is gone. But because I said I wouldn't wipe you out again with a flood, I'm not going to wipe you out. My solution now is, after Genesis 11, in Genesis 12, I'm going to call this Abraham guy, and it's going to be supernatural from the beginning. He's an old guy with a barren old wife who couldn't possibly have kids. And from that, a promise is going to come. And I'm going to protect that lineage right through down to Jesus. And he's going to be the one who sets everybody free from these powers. And basically in the resurrection, because these powers weren't aware of what they were doing, we'll take this Jesus, we'll take this pesky Jesus guy out. But then, last laugh, resurrection, boom, reestablishes authority over those powers. I think the real issue then, that big story, because that's another story, it's a big meta story that describes from the beginning and gives an account from a Christian point of view. I think, realistically, we've got too many people whose eyes are blinded and their minds are closed and they're under the influence of these spiritual powers, mate.
Yes, exactly. And I think we see what kind of powers that are now seeping across all these nations. And then when we're looking at a board of peace that are going to have these 10 representatives of nations, you know, these kings with no nations, crowns with no nation. Is this related? I think we've got to have that conversation because of what we can see, what these bloodlines have been able to establish all through, you know, it's a continuation. There's no separation of any of this. It's always been them moving their boundaries for power. World War One and Two changed boundaries, created countries that haven't been there, mixed races and populations, which created, mistrust, created all kinds of language barriers, cultural barriers, all kinds. They're doing it again. It's all part of a plan to make us all not know anything about ourselves, to mix everything. All the religions now go to God. And there's one specific set of scriptures in a book that says, don't listen to any of that. And when you see something, you know, if your house is on fire and you can't see it, do you keep arguing with somebody who's telling you? Or do you get up, go and investigate, go outside and then reevaluate? Do you do something? Well, it's like the house is on fire, but people just don't seem to be able to see it because, you know, we could vote this out. There's a big thing because the darts crowd were calling Keir Starmer names. You know, it's like these minor little victories. Well, these are little victories are happening while other major things are going. We've seen what's happened in Australia with these the shootings. We've now got other people being arrested, but then released with no charge. It's creating that fear mongering that they could be here, there, and everywhere. Is there a story behind it? We don't know. But when we come back to our own ordinary lives, it's something that we can't fit into most of our consciousness because we're too busy trying to survive. So now we're being attacked on every front, and they've got the audacity to come out and say, your kids now need to get prepared to go to war. For you've got, if people are going to pack their kids off for a war that's going on with these people, that I have to turn to child abuse, because you are teaching kids something that is fundamentally wrong, just like you have been born in the wrong body. God can't make mistakes, mate. He knew you before the foundation. Who would I trust? I know who I would trust. But this world is it looks so real, it feels so hard, it feels so much pain and so much joy all at the same time. And you're trying to spin all your plates in this world, and there's people just walking around laughing and trying to knock these plates off. And that's the influences that you're talking about. It's all what your doubts, your possibilities of what you could create from your own will. You can't sustain it. And when you're under attack like that, where else do you go? Well, it just decimates people and it destroys souls. It tears people apart. And we now see we've seen it through nations throughout history, but now we're seeing it on a worldwide scale where society is actually, on a cusp.
Yeah, man. And it's funny, isn't it? Because Denny's asked this question in chat. Paul and Alex, do you think you are oddballs? And I've said, yes, Dennis. And it's a good question to ask because we are oddballs, and we've got to ask why we're oddballs, really. Like, for example, if you had conventional religion, people might go, I don't believe in that conventional religious story because I'm an atheist. I don't believe in that type of metaphysical explanation. I'm just a materialist. But people wouldn't say they were an oddball. They'd just say, well, I don't agree with them. Or, they believe in Santa Claus. But they wouldn't be considered to be odd. They'd be considered to be a part of a cohort of people who happen to believe that there were divine beings. But again, as long as those divine beings aren't doing anything other than being sat there and being passive recipients of our projections, there's a story. I can watch this story. I can read this story. I can go to a building and I can listen to somebody talk about this story. I can even join in as well and be part of this story. I can go to the carol service at church on a Sunday morning or a Christmas Eve or whatever it is, and we can light the candles and have the lovely little carols. And as long as I do that, I'm not an oddball. I'm just part of a cultural tradition where we just accept everything that we're told, and the goal is that we just end up having nice, cozy experiences. And who doesn't like nice, cozy experiences? So people would just say, well, I don't believe that, but I don't think those people were odd. So the people who get classed as oddballs are oddballs because it's odd for most people to ask questions like, when we peer behind the veil, what might be the linking story behind all of this that makes sense of all of it? And secondarily, when I've done that, what am I going to do about it? How am I going to show that I take that story seriously rather than just being a passive recipient who just engages? So yeah, cultural rituals, people who just fulfill cultural rituals are just people following a script that somebody else wrote for them. So I think it was interesting what Dinny was saying, because I don't think he was being critical or negative. He asked an important question, and I'd say, yeah, bring it on. Let's all be oddballs.
The oddest thing that I've ever seemed to have said to anybody is that the gas was free, Alex. They just couldn't. Yeah. It's not. I can't say that they couldn't have understood the concept. It was their unwillingness to want to understand it. It was like there was a safety mechanism there, because I do understand it when I realised what we were doing and what the consequences of that was, and it's waved in our faces how this debt thing is so bad that we've got to do something about it, and yet we had it in our hands all the time. 10 years ago, those gyros remedies were like confetti. Then they ban them. Then they refuse to issue them. So now people would have to sue for them. But that's too much. Well, it gets to a point where that is no longer available to you, just like it is. If you can't do the work, then nothing changes. So if they've got you in that, still got you in that fight, I've met so many people over the years, Alex, you probably have as well, that they've got the knowledge, they've got the passion, but they've just not got the fight in them, because you start to get chinks in your armor when when you're married, when you've got kids involved. How do you put your family in the firing line to try and prove that you're getting ripped off by an institution that makes money hand over fist, and it's through your own fault, and ignorance of that action is nobody's fault but your own. So it's all put on you. So everything to do with society is based on all our decisions, all by consent. And how have they done that? They've farmed us with myths coming through bloodlines, through institutions, through education systems. You do a big cull every so often of the nations, and you have things where you can refill those gaps with history. And all of a sudden, we have history that should be asked questions about. It's if we've got questions about it, we call it science. We keep asking and testing. Well, if we can't ask the questions, something's been hidden. When you ask those questions and all you get are more questions, then you've got to pursue something for answers. But you're going to have to go deep. You're going to have to go dirty. You're going to have to know the nastiness. Why? Because this world is fallen, and you need to know the good and the evil. You're here to know it. You wanted to, you've chosen to. Again, it's your action. But what if being evil is not necessarily pure evil, but just disobeying, just being naughty? But everybody says, oh, it's okay. Because your last few statements earlier, when you were saying what you were talking about, of the mixing, it sounded like you were telling me I can't put my Christmas tree up, Alex.
This is the thing with cultural practices. At the end of the day, we've got. Sorry, I'm just moving around a bit here. Leg cramp. With culture, because none of us really know what culture is harmful and what culture is harmful. We've not got a built-in code, which means we've got to get the source from somewhere outside of ourselves. Our intuition is not going to tell us everything. So, we've got a mind, so we've got cognitive capacity, we've got our affects, our emotions, our feelings, and we've got our behaviors, and they've got to work in tandem. So we've got to test everything. And I've spoken before about a book that was written in 1951 called Christ and Culture by a guy called H. Richard Niebuhr. And it became a seminal text that people have, relied on and built upon. And he says, that the way we understand the relationship between Jesus Christ and fallen culture is, it's quite challenged. There's not one way to look at it. And it's precisely why we have these problems in the church where people don't know where the line is. So like when the Jewish festivals, when the Apostle Paul, who was obviously Saul of Tarsus originally, once he took this message to the Gentiles, once the Jewish church had become established, and which later died out, he then had to start engaging and separating off a lot of the practices as he moved it into the Gentile situation. It's like, well, do we need circumcision for the Gentiles? Well, no, that's the old covenant. And then some Jews would say, well, you know, are you saying that the Jews don't continue with their traditions? But he was very clear, no, the Jews continue within their covenants. And so he didn't insist that Jewish people stop circumcising their children. He said, no, you can stay within that. He said, it doesn't matter. Salvation doesn't come from this, but to be a recognized culture, you Jews can carry on with your Jewish practices, but Jesus is still the Messiah. He's still the Savior. You won't be saved or not saved by circumcision or not circumcision. So these cultural questions became really pronounced. So, you know, the early church moved things away from Saturday to Sunday. And because of the resurrection, they were trying to move away from the old religious spirituality that had been prevalent within Jewish understanding. So Christianity had to have roots in Judaism that it didn't forget, because the covenant going back to Abraham and before came from that Old Testament. So you don't get rid of that. If you get rid of that, you become a Gnostic. You become somebody like Marcion, getting rid of the Old Testament and saying, oh, this Old Testament God's not like the New Testament one. The New Testament one's the real one. So you've got to maintain your Old Testament roots, but you mustn't be defined by the Old Covenants. So again, things like Passover and, you know, Easter coming in, all those things, on some levels, we understand why the shift was happening. And Paul needed to bring about some of those shifts so Christianity could become separate from Judaism and not just get sucked back in to the Old Covenant. So some of that was necessary, but there was some overcorrection. And the church went too much the other way. So this question on culture and where the line is between revealed truth and cultural practice is quite difficult. That's why Christians struggle with that today, and discernment is necessary. It isn't just quoting chapter and verse of scripture. It's how do I discern the big picture? Like we've said many a time about the serpent in Eden. Serpent isn't Satan, but virtually every Christian who you talk to who listens to a sermon, you know, that doesn't come from an oddball, as Denny said, like you and me, Paul, they'll be just saying, yeah, it says in Revelation 20 or whatever it is, 22, 21, 22, that, yeah, that's the serpent of old is Satan. That's the only point. That's not happening in the Old Testament, and it's a much more complex picture. So, you know, there's a lot of ideas that are going around which are not strictly biblical, that exist in the minds and hearts of Christians. But that's because the Bible is not as simple, as straightforward a book as people think. So if you don't follow and you don't research and you don't study, then you're not in a dynamic relationship with that set of sources. Then you're just going to reduce it to these simplistic rituals, and then you want to go to church and in a certain way, and you want to celebrate Christmas and have a carol service and go at Easter because that's what everyone else is doing. So the problem is not whether people, for me, it's not whether people do certain practices. It's the fact that the whole church is shifted and made a set of assumptions and has not corrected them. It's not continued to stay connected with critical thinking and a living faith. It's just become a set of dead traditions a lot of the time.
It's people have presumed things into the text. You know, it's the God is love and it's all unconditional. Well, if you're reading the Bible and you're following the Bible and you're meant to be preaching the Bible,
yeah,
then you can't be believing that, because the Bible tells you that there are conditions. You know, there's certain things that you must be doing. And when you say, well, this is just an acceptance, you know, it's like one church I went into said we believe in pre-trib rapture. And I said, well, that's not scriptural. And I started to question about it. And his answer was, well, what does it matter anyway? As long as we know that Jesus is our saviour. And I'm like, well, it matters to me. It really does matter to me. And I'm reading the words, and those words are saying the opposite to what you're saying. Even Jesus says immediately after those times. And I'm like, how can I interpret that as before anything happens? You know, if it's like, Can we do that after? Is me doing it now? No, it's after. No, we're doing it now then. No, after. It becomes a silliness that I can't sit with, Alex. This is why I find it difficult. I think somebody asked about, was it Dinny again who asked about, do we go to churches? Or was it Martin? And
Martin.
he said, do we go to any churches? I've tried, Martin. There's no churches that actually speak. You don't get me wrong. They'll say the words, verses, and stuff, but the establishment just doesn't seem to be the promotion of what it says in the Bible. There's certain things that are diluted. Certain sin that's it's not the 10 Commandments. It's more of the 7 Commandments and 3 suggestions, or whatever they're putting a spin on it. Well, I've seen those spins all through my life. People putting spins on it. People who Catholics or Muslim, Protestants, all JW's Mormons, to I'm just going to raise my vibration and my consciousness to 5D and I'll become my own Christ. All that. It's all man putting their own spin on it. So I've got to say my rule of thumb, my foundation's got to be, if it goes against the Bible, because the Bible has been the truth for the last 8 years of what I've seen, and that's my foundation. If it goes against that, I've got to shove it to one side, but I've still got to find out where it fits in. And all these religions are fitting in, and they fit together very, very well, and they fit together under a nice communistic dictatorship as well, and they believe that they can go for it. And are they going to catch us all snoozing? Because the ones that are waking up, the ones who want to do something about it are the ones who don't know what to do. So they get angry and they can't articulate it, and they pick people off. We've seen it throughout that truth movement, haven't we, for 15 years, Alex? Where when anybody was doing anything, was shocking the foundations, as in groups, those groups was infiltrated, and they all disbanded because people start arguing, and before long, that's all they need. A bit of confusion. We've seen it done once very well at Babel. Bit of confusion there, and people just say, "I'm not doing that anymore." And from something that could have been something really good, changing something, we've got what we've got, and you can't say we don't deserve what we've got because they asked you. They asked you, "Did you want all this?" And you went, "Yeah."
Yeah. Did you think that in the chart, "At all praise to my God" is the resurrected form of me director?
I don't know. I'm not seeing that, mate.
First, the comment here: first sin, believing you are a person. That sounds very me directorish to me. I'm pretty much a Sherlock Holmes detective type of person and stuff like this. I always find it interesting when people.
You said you're a person.
Name, and I go,
you just said you're a person. You just said it.
Yeah, a person. Yeah, I mean it's interesting, isn't it, with that, because you can see the dog Latin thing that people talk about, and obviously people talk about the living man and woman, and of course the problem is, once people become pedantic about language, you just, no, we can't use the word person now. Then you go, okay, I'm a human being. Oh, you can't even use the word personal because that implies that I'm a person and a person's a dead entity. It just becomes another mantra. It just becomes like a secular form of the same legalism of the Pharisees, turning a particular configuration of languages to like garlic to a vampire, so that we can't use that word. And we think if we just don't use that word, then everything's okay. I mean, it's just like, what can you say to that?
Division. People start arguing over stupid things, pedantic things that don't mean anything. We've got to get to the crux of the matter.
Yeah.
That's where it is. As in, for we give to Caesar what is Caesar's. We've got to expose what the government is doing to us. The government isn't doing anything wrong if everybody's in agreement with them. no matter what they're doing, whether it's right or wrong. If you're in agreement with them, if you're voting for them, doesn't matter who you're looking at. Get rid of Starmer. It doesn't matter. The manifesto's still there. Nothing's going to change. But then you're going to get promoted with somebody who's going to come in and change everything. A Trump-like type knight in shining armour. And everybody will jump on that boat. It's easy. Early at the start of it, are we all born to be sheep? Well, just look at what the flock's doing. The flock's confused. They don't know which shepherd to follow. Who's shouting to them? There's loads of different people shouting, I'm the way, this way. I'll sort this out. Let me do it. That's all it takes. And as long as you've got a baseline of you've still got them working hard and paying the bills, and paying for things they're not meant to be paying for, because they're doing the graft. They are paying for it. They're letting you even take taxes to give them benefits within that system. It's all about an agreement. So when you're born into that agreement, and then you come out of it, what do? Well, you walk off into the wilderness and do nothing. Well, you can't engage with anything. You can't engage with anybody. You're certainly not influencing any energies because you're not even putting your energies in there. Are you the talent? Are you the servant that has the one talent who takes it out to the wilderness, who's going to bring it back and say, look, I kept this talent? Or are you going to use that talent no matter what for the good of the kingdom? And it's only what your purpose is. If you go and open that Bible and ask the really open questions with an open heart because you want to know the truth, your work, your path will be totally different to everybody else's. It's if you have got to the point where you realise that this world isn't fulfilling. When you look at the example of Solomon, where there was nothing he couldn't have in abundance, from the absolute debaucherous to the absolutely pure. He could have everything, and he wasn't fulfilled. He was absolutely empty. That's what he said. There's nothing left for him. So he had his fill of this world, and there isn't anything in it. And the more we try and fill the voids that are created through generational trauma, parental trauma, our own traumas, and all the consequences that go with it, then you're talking about a basket case that needs a reboot. All that malware that you've took on board, you need a reboot. That's the rebirth. And the only way to be reborn is for you to be able to think totally differently and to have the conviction to not do what you used to do. And sometimes it's stuff that you used to love and society still does. But even though you can do it, it's not necessarily good for you in the long run. It's one of those. You still with me, right?
Yeah. It's getting a little bit of lag. Can you see Dennis's comment in the chat? It's quite a good one, I think. Can you put it on screen?
Martin. I can see, Martin.
No, it's the truth. That's the one. I think that's a really good way of it being, a summation.
Well,
and people do. It's like food in my belly. I don't worry too much about this, but I'm still there.
You're breaking up a little bit. You're there now.
Yeah, am I still there?
Yeah, you're here.
Right. So basically, I want to just double down on a point I think I might have made last week or the week before about the serpent and the legalese system, because, and I don't know what you think about this. I've been thinking a bit more about it today, actually. Obviously, last week I mentioned that what God's about is covenant, and covenant's all about love. So I was talking about earlier, Abraham and Sarah after Nimrod and the Tower of Babel. It's the third strike and you're out. God divorces humanity completely, and then begins the work again with Abraham and Sarah and sets up this lineage. That's covenant in the classic sense. It's God saying, I am going to redeem all these rebels and I'm going to bring these principalities into subjugation. But that started with the serpent planting the doubt, the seed of doubt, and targeting Eve. So it just strikes me that God is the God of covenants, and everything else that's false in the Babylonian system and connected with sin and evil and all the depravity that we see is contractually based, which we might describe as the commercial jurisdiction. And I actually believe that the serpent, when he nobbled Eve, he was really inviting her into a contractual understanding of how things work with God. You know, it's very practical. Did God really say, well, that you if you do the right thing here and try this and do this, then you can have this contractual relationship with life where you can follow your curiosity and just have what you want with no consequences. You can transgress boundaries. And it's great. So that's the contract I want to set up with you. What do you reckon? And then obviously he was given joinder. And I think that contrast between contract and covenant is what it's all about, mate. And that this fallen Babylonian jurisdiction as commercial, as you mentioned, with council tax, gas, water, electric, that's the logical consequence of how it's embedded itself within systems, all human systems, all modern bureaucracies, all corruption that is draining us like a parasite. It's all contractually based. But God isn't a God of contracts, he's a God of covenants. So he's wiping all the contracts away. Look at Year of Jubilee. He says, yeah, we've got these contracts. Yeah, we have these relationships that become parasitic and draining. And yeah, people charge money at interest. We're going to wipe all the debt, Isaiah 61. There's going to be a Year of Jubilee, which Jesus proclaimed. So he's replacing notions of contract, which are very functional between human beings. You know, you can have two parties to a contract who don't care about each other at all. It's just business. It's just business. It's soulless. There's winners and losers. You can't have winners and winners. But in a covenant, we all win, provided that we're under the covering of God.
Yeah, well, it was interesting when you were talking about the circumcision and how in the old covenant with the Jews, they were still not allowed, but the tradition wasn't told to be stopped with the new covenant. But that's because they were originally God's chosen. Jesus came for his sheep, the ones that rejected him, the ones that knew him, the ones that had seen, the ones that had understood, and they still rejected him because they wanted to mix with this world. They wanted both. You know, it wasn't that they didn't understand what they were here for, what this world was. So I think that's what sets them apart, because God isn't done with those who rejected him. You know, they had a special place. They were meant to be the example. They were the ones with the knowledge, and they were the ones that corrupted it and then bent that knowledge and twisted that knowledge, where we get the Pharisees and the Sanhedrin, we get all these other factions that then start coming, and you get somebody turn up who says everything completely against them, fulfills all these prophecies that have been written in all these manuscripts in these languages that correlate with each other, and you think all these other things, they're all liars, all causing evil and distortion in the world, from frequency to gas, water, and electric, and they all say that's wrong. And you think, I've got to give this a go. I've got to look at this, and especially when you're seeing things that are written in these scriptures, Alex, and we're seeing things that are rolling down that road with blatancy. You know, we're not there yet, but so's the kingdom, but it's here, but not yet. Where are we on these timelines? You know, this is really speeding up. We're seeing the signs, Alex. We've still got signs to see, but how long have we got? Who knows?
Yeah, exactly.
Let's get to some of these videos. might be a bit mixed up, this one, but we were doing the surveillance stuff, and I've come across some of this lady's work, and you know, it's very interesting what she does. Let me see if I've got this right.
Digital ID system to track you, then why can't it track where the money goes? You see, I'm not speculating, I ask them. Money made from the Crown estates, the lands, the seabeds, wind farms, it first goes into the government's consolidated fund. 25% of it tax-free gets paid back out, as we know, as the sovereign grant. The remaining 75% stays with all other government income. And the Treasury have confirmed it's not ring-fenced. It's not traceable by source, and there are no internal documents showing where it's allocated after that point. So once it's pooled, its identity disappears. You see, after pooling, money becomes interchangeable. Departments receive the budgets, and then the budgets are spent on public services, outsourcing, and contracts with private companies. All legal, all audited for compliance, but the public cannot trace where the wealth generated from public land ultimately funds public services or private contractors, not because it's illegal, but the system's designed not to show us. I also asked for a list of laws that required royal consent. The response was there's no central list. Complying one would cost too much. I was told to manually search one law at a time. So we can build national digital identity infrastructure, but not a basic transparency record about power. So let's be honest about what this really means. The state can identify you very precisely, but when it comes to billions in public money, the public is structurally prevented from following it.
Now, if we take what Dinny was talking about Uber Eats there, if your Uber Eats comes cold, you want your money back. If they've overcharged you, you want your money back. All that public money is being laundered. That's a perfect example of money laundering. You can't get a better money laundering situation than no accountability, Alex. You know, there's actually we've got to talk about then the taxes that are being taken, that are paying for the gas, water, and electric grid, and then you're paying them again. This is just unreal, and you've been taught to do this, and yet, you know, it's so difficult to get people to open up to think about these things. Now, as Alex, as Taylor's been able to make it, I wasn't sure if he was going to make it or not. We've got a couple of videos he might want to have some comments on, but these videos, Alex, they're just raising questions for me, because remember we were talking about, like, with Taylor, about this worldwide plan that's all in operation, which raises its own questions. But there's a few videos that are coming here that I think raise a lot of questions, and we need to. I think there's a lot of sifting to do. I don't think there's I think you said it before, Alex, an easy answer. I think there's a lot of correlating factors. So we'll start with this one.
Hey, I have an idea. Mr. President, why don't you give him a pardon? Give him a pardon. Come on. By the way, that was not in the speech, as you probably know. But I happen to like this gentleman right over here, and it just seems to make so much sense. You know, whether we like it or not, this has been one of the greatest wartime presidents. This is one of the greatest wartime presidents. And cigars and champagne, who the hell cares about that? Israel and I have gotten along very well. The relationship with BB has been obviously a very good. Look, we took out Iran. We wiped out with that plane right there. We wiped out the B-2 bomber. We wiped out the Iran nuclear threat, and because of that, we were able to make peace in the Middle East. No, we've had a very good relationship with Israel. We actually have a very good relationship with just about everybody in the Middle East.
Mr. President, how do you know that the Palestinians don't want to leave their land? Some people say this is ethnic cleansing. You won't be able to force them to leave their land.
We're moving them to a beautiful location where they have new homes, where they can live safely, where they'll have doctors and medical, and we'll build beautiful communities for the 1.9 million people. We'll build beautiful communities, safe communities. Could be 5, 6, could be 2, but we'll build safe communities a little bit away from where they are, where all of this danger is. In the meantime, I would own this. Think of it as a real estate development for the future. It would be a beautiful piece of land.
Would the Palestinians
No
have the
big
right to
money
return?
spent. No, they wouldn't, because they're going to have much better housing, much better. In other words, I'm talking about building a permanent place for them. Because if they have to return now, it will be years before you could ever. It's not habitable. It will be years before it could happen. I'm talking about starting to build, and I think I could make a deal with Jordan. I think I could make a deal with Egypt.
Let's go into own Gaza. Your White House has been clear. Taxpayer dollars won't be used for this. So what money are you going to use to buy Gaza?
We're not going to buy anything. We're going to have it, and we're going to keep it, and we're going to make sure that there's going to be peace, and there's not going to be any problem, and nobody's going to question it. And we're going to run it very properly, and eventually we'll have an economic development at a very large scale, maybe the largest scale on that site. And we'll have lots of good things built there, including hotels and office buildings and housing and other things. And we'll make that site into what it should be. And the people from Gaza who wouldn't be able to be there for years, but it's going to be a wonderful thing. It's going to be wonderful for the Middle East. I think it'll turn the Middle East. I think you're going to have peace in the Middle East. You're going to eventually have peace in the Middle East.
So now Trump has a plan for Gaza. We'll find them a plot of land, maybe for a more. Build them some nice, beautiful places where they can be happy. Oh yes, after leveling their homes, after burying their children under rubble, after turning an entire city into unlivable wasteland, now suddenly Trump wants to do Gazans a favor. Because you see, in his mind, the problem isn't that Israel has massacred tens of thousands, displaced millions, and obliterated entire neighborhoods. No. The problem is that Gazans are still there. So what's the solution? Get rid of them. Find them a plot of land somewhere, doesn't really matter where, just not in Gaza. The excuse today? Gaza is destroyed. It is uninhabitable, as Steve Witkoff, Trump's billionaire Nobel friend, put it. And whose fault is that, Steve? Did Gaza just disappear on its own? Did its homes, its schools, its centuries-old mosques and churches just decide to collapse? Was it hit by an earthquake, a natural disaster? Or was it Israeli bombs, American bombs, 50,000 tons of them, leveling entire neighborhoods, burying entire families alive? And of course, who's paying for this grand humanitarian project? The Arabs. Because as Trump so eloquently put it, there's a lot of money in that area. That's all the Middle East is to him. Money, land, oil, gas. Not nations, not people, not histories, not identities, just resources to be seized, deals to be made, profits to be counted. But this isn't just about business. It's colonialism dressed as capitalism. Trump isn't just another greedy developer looking for land. He is both a racist colonialist and a ruthless businessman. And the hypocrisy, the glorious hypocrisy. This is the same Trump who built his entire political brand on shutting borders. The man who ranted and raved about migrants invading America, who caged children at the border, who banned refugees, who called asylum seekers criminals and rapists. But when it comes to the Palestinians, suddenly migration is good. Suddenly displacement is necessary. Suddenly he's all about relocation and resettlement. Trump, the man who fought tooth and nail to keep refugees out of America, now wants to force Palestinians out of their homeland. It's not just hypocrisy, it's grotesque. And it's not just Trump, it's the entire system that enables him. Because let's be clear, the forced transfer of Palestinians isn't some fringe idea. It's not just the delusion of Israel's far-right extremists. Smotrich and Ben Gvir's vision of mass expulsion is now US policy. Palestinians must leave, Gaza must be emptied, and to make it palatable, it's all being rebranded as voluntary migration. You know, Trump may think he's come up with this brilliant, unprecedented solution, but Israel has been trying to get rid of Gaza's population since the moment it occupied it. In 1967, after Israel seized Gaza, its leaders, not the far-right fanatics of today, but the so-called left-wing moderates, sat in their cabinet meetings discussing how to make Gaza disappear. Prime Minister Levi Eshkol spoke openly of emptying out Gaza first, not ruling it, not even controlling it, removing it. Defense Minister Moshe Dayan suggested that only a quarter of Gaza's population should remain, while the rest must be removed from there under any arrangement that's made. Eshkol wanted to make life so unbearable that Palestinians would simply leave on their own. He was clear about the method. He says, and I quote, "Perhaps if we don't give them enough water, they won't have a choice because their orchards will yellow and wither." Another minister, Yosef Sapir, put it more bluntly, "We should take them to the East Bank, that's Jordan, by the scruff of their necks and throw them there. And I don't know who will take them, especially the Gaza refugees. Remember, 87 of Gaza's inhabitants are refugees from the towns and villages cleansed in 1948 to make way for Israel. The same language, the same logic, the same genocidal vision. The only difference, back then in 1967, Gaza's population was 400,000. Today, it's 2.5 million. Eshkol's plan failed, and so will Trump's. Because Gaza is not a land without a people. Gaza is not some plot for sale. Gaza is part of Palestine, and Gaza does not surrender. Gaza has always resisted. Dayan, the man who wanted to thin Gaza's population, thought he had finally crushed its resistance in the 1970s. He thought that if he could assassinate Ziad al-Husseini, the Palestinian commander leading the resistance in Gaza and northern Sinai after their occupation, the fight would end. He was so convinced of it that in frustration he admitted, "I rule Gaza by day, but al-Husseini rules it by night." So Israel went after him. They arrested his mother, Suad al-Husseini, tortured her, gouged out one of her eyes. And on November 21st, 1971, they finally assassinated Ziad when he was only 32. And they thought that was it, that Gaza would break, that its people would submit, that its resistance had been buried with him. It wasn't. It only grew stronger. And as Mahmoud Darwish, the famous poet, wrote in 1971, "Gaza is no longer a city. It is a burning battlefield in which the adversary's victories, hopes, values are tested. The illusory facts on the ground he is trying to create, thinking that time is on his side, will be mocked by that very same time, as well as by the trail of crushing defeats past invaders suffered in the alleyways of Gaza at the hands of its sons and daughters." That was written half a century ago. And today, after everything, after the bombs, the salvage, Gaza still stands. Trump may repeat it 100 times. Take the people, take the people, take the people. But the people of Gaza have already answered with their bodies, with their voices, with their march through the ruins, with their refusal to leave the land that is theirs. We are not.
Hey, I haven't.
I know it was a bit longer than I thought, but my questions about this is this has been going on for such a long time. Where do we start to join all these dots? If this has been an underlying plan, that now all of a sudden that the Middle East is moving into a position where this is coming to fruition. I mean, they're just building houses, Alex, aren't they? They're not doing anything wrong. What's going on? Because I can agree with Taylor on these parts, that we're watching a play playing out here. But if Netanyahu isn't Netanyahu, and this is just the fulfillment of what's been going on, Does it then say that Q has been there for a long time under various different guises, and it's now come to fruition with a plan 8 years ago? What's your take on it, Alex?
Well, I don't. It's interesting because I don't look too much at the ongoing saga geopolitically that revolves around this situation in Palestine. I'm not quite sure why that is. I've commented in the past about, the Romans and Syria, Palestina, and Hadrian in 135 AD. When I listen to a woman like that, she's basically just a useful idiot. And for me, I couldn't see her face, which was probably a good thing because her voice was driving me up the wall. But yeah, to me, a useful idiot was bought into a bunch of propaganda, and it's just a different vantage point. I think there's polarized camps, and a lot of the liberal lefty lunatics, and there's a lot of them. They've just become how can I put it? Humanitarian. You see, it's like with humanitarianism, it's very difficult to be against humanitarianism, isn't it? Because we're all human. So you're not against humanitarianism, but what happens is they weaponize it. So they just talk about one side of the equation, and they just point out from their perspective a load of atrocities, and you just get these. You get Douglas Murray often taking the other perspective, and then all you get Douglas Murray haters who just adopt the same position that this woman was batting on about. And you don't know. Douglas Murray says, I've been there. I've seen what it was like beforehand. And you had Israeli and Palestinian families getting on, even sometimes marrying. So there's a sense in which this has been fomented. And then we go, well, by whom? Is it by Netanyahu? Is it by the Hamas faction? What's true and what's not true? And all I know is when I heard that woman speak, I just thought, well, she's a useful idiot. She doesn't have a clue what she's talking about. And yeah, I just, it's not something that I massively get involved in. I have an intuitive sort of radar. Say again, pal.
I'm going to say, do you not feel that there's a certain, in the last few weeks, there's a certain whipping up of things with Muslims and Palestinians, and the shootings at the beach, and then the other arrests, and then the so-called imams in Australia celebrating what had happened. Now, me and you have got Muslim friends who'd be horrified by that. So what's going on? Why are we seeing this slant? Because if Trump is just, if somebody hears that as just propaganda, that Trump is saying, yeah, we'll just move them to these other beautiful places and then we'll move in, we'll build houses and things like that. And you've seen the plans that they've got for this, and he's talking about peace in the Middle East, and you're thinking, what is this going to come at? So I can see how this is all building up, but you can see the propaganda war certainly kicking in now, isn't it, Alex?
Yeah. I mean, it's a tough one because in some situations it's easier to discern an underlying truth or where the error is. So I wouldn't say I'm a particular fan of the secular nation state of Israel because it is it's a nation state. It's protecting its interests that you might understand geopolitically. They're seeking alliances, obviously with America as a protector. So these things have been going on for a long time, as I've said in the past with Israel. It's just it's a modern secular state now that still doffs its cap to God in principle every now and again. But really, it's about Israel. It's about the state of Israel continuing. I don't hear much about God in any meaningful sense. So I think that Israel's lost its way, and therefore I wouldn't be surprised by any ways in which it's continued to act out of alignment with the covenants that God made with it. And they don't look to be recognizing Christ, so on paper at least. But we know all these things will start to happen. So, yeah, I don't have 100% sympathy with either side, but I just can't abide the propagandists like the one we just heard, because to me, what she's saying is just pure rhetoric and baloney, and it just doesn't ring true for me. And in a way, I don't want to look at the facts in that situation too much. I'll keep my eyes open and sort of watch for little things here and there, but no, I think it's, I don't tend to swear very much now, but I'd say it's a shit show. And really, there is a lot of theatre, but my sympathies really, I suppose, lean slightly more towards Israel than they do, because it's not about claims made about Palestinian suffering. I can't verify those claims, and there's so much going on in the world that how am I going to know? I'm going to listen to Douglas Murray. It's one side saying yes it is, and the other side saying no it isn't, and you go, right, how am I going to do anything other than align with one of these voices that's very vociferous and says, oh, it's terrible and all these atrocities are happening, and then the other side, it's terrible and all these terrible terrorist acts are happening. And I just think, well, how can I verify that? I'm certainly not going to take a side, other than my general sympathy, which is with the fact that God still has a plan for Israel, and I do believe that he called them back to the homeland, and I do believe 1948 was a part of it, and I believe all the nonsense about it was always Palestine is demonstrably false in history. It was always Israel, and Palestine was imposed upon Israel, trying to obliterate Israel in 135 AD. The Romans tried everything, and they'd had enough of, the rebellions, the Jewish rebellions, so they decided to try and wipe them off the map. So in 1948, that was corrected. Now, whatever other things were happening behind the scenes, whatever the movers and shakers were, we can only look at the human agents and make superficial judgments. The question is, do we believe that God's hand is behind it all on some level? And I would say, yeah, things are probably unfolding pretty much according to the divine template.
Yeah, I don't think I could argue with that. Taylor, I've got one more video to play, but do you want to would you stick with the fact, because you've often said that a lot of it is narrative that's coming over from there from your opinion. So would you say that is the same, just propaganda? It's the, oh yes it is, oh no it isn't type stuff.
Yes. Well, also still attacking. I don't know who this woman is. And by the way, I just want to mention, you didn't show the video on the screen. You only played the audio, and it was coming in and out, so kind of difficult to hear it.
We have these difficulties, my friend.
Yeah, we all do. You're not wrong about that.
Is that it? You finished it then? No worries.
Well, I mean, I have certain thoughts, but the thing is like I said, I only heard about maybe half of it, so I don't want to give prejudgments to something that I only heard bits and pieces of the video. So
it'd have been nice if somebody had told me we were having issues, and it didn't sound like it from my end. It was smooth. So right, I'll play this last video because again, this throws another. Is it a red herring, or is it another thing to think about? Because again, we were talking about this worldwide thing that's going on. We're seeing that we heard Trump wanting Netanyahu, but is it Netanyahu whether? But he wants Netanyahu pardoned from war crimes and things like that. Best wartime prime minister was he? It's very strange things we're seeing that's developing over there, but this one is a little bit left field as well. I just want your opinions on this. Let me know if it works.
Very Chabad on Russia. Putin is a Chabadnik. Putin loves Israel.
3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm walking home with Rabbi Lazar. You'd think he'd be impressed that he had these oligarchs worth $30 billion. He said to me, I had success tonight. I said, what was your success? He says, 3 guys decided to get a bris, and 4 guys decided to put on film. But we're talking here a different kind of world. They run the economy of Russia. The difference is we're the Jewish establishment in Russia. There's no Jewish Federation. We are the Jewish Federation. There's no ADL. We are the ADL. There's no AJC. We are the AJC. Judaism in Russia is run 98% by Chabad. It's a different ballgame. And everything in the city is run by Jews. The shopping centers are owned by Jews. Both airlines are owned by a Jew. The banks are owned by Jews. The gas stations are owned by Jews. The whole downtown, everything is owned by these oligarchs. In fact, the governor now, back in Ukraine, is one of these oligarchs. One of the other elements for the success of Judaism in Russia, even though he's not so popular right now in the United States, has been the friendship to the Jewish world of the president of Russia, which is Vladimir Putin. And you have to ask yourselves, why is this so? I heard a great line from a professor of mathematics, Novis Sabirs. He told me like this: Putin may not be good for Russia, but he's definitely good for the Jews of Russia.
So we've got another mixer in there. We've got, obviously, this fella's sounding very anti-Semitic, Alex, saying that the Jews are doing all that in Russia. They've got all that control. So which Jews are them? Well, are they related to the Jews in Israel that Trump's part of, and Putin's helping the other Jews? What Jews are we looking at?
Yeah, well, that's a really difficult one that we've addressed before, because biological and ethnic Jew, confessional Jew, is a Jew or was a Jew under the Old Covenant, somebody who just confessed Yahweh within the covenants, or where they come from the lineage from a Jewish mother, passed down undiluted. I mean, obviously, around the time of the Second Temple period, which was from 500 BCE to 70 CE, when the temple was destroyed, you've got all that stuff going on at the beginning with Ezra when they come back from Babylonian captivity, and he's talking about how they've married foreign women, and it's affected the bloodlines. And if you look at how long that intermarrying went on to try and get a pure bloodline, I mean, you know, everyone does ancestry, don't they, when they get curious about, you know, certain relatives, and was that really my dad, or was that, you know, how do I know? And you do the ancestry check and you do the DNA stuff. I think if you check the DNA, that would be interesting. We see those results, you know, 3% Iranian, you know, 10% Czech or whatever. It'd be interesting if you had that profile, if all these people claiming to be Jewish had these blood tests, DNA tests, what would it tell us about the ethnic mix within them? I'm pretty sure it'd be pretty diluted, and some of them will be slightly mongrel by now, you know, but they're still making a claim based on a tradition which had some historical continuity. And we know that when people go into forms of exile, they stick together. We know when people, even in this country, when Muslims come from other countries, they come over here, they want to stick together. They want to live side by side in communities. So identities transcend pure biology, and they're obviously connected. And we know that John the Baptist said, even before Jesus, you know, God can make children of Abraham from these very stones. Don't presume to say we have Abraham to our father. So, you know, this idea of genetic lineage, DNA in the blood, ethnicity, was already being questioned by John the Baptist. So I think if you apply that across the board, it's got to be Jews with some connection to the land, some connection and identity by sticking together, surviving in little enclaves, maybe away from their own land, which seems to be something that's been common. And then eventually come back. Yeah, they're going to have got watered down, diluted. The DNA profiles will be affected. They still have a confession. What kind of confession? I mean, you know, a lot of the Jews that went into exile precisely because God had punished them and said, "You've not been following me faithfully." So they were syncretistic. They were bringing other religious perspectives in, Baal worship and other stuff. So what is a pure Jew? if it's not pure sociological and cultural identity, pure religious affiliation, pure genetics, it's going to be a bit ragtag and bobtail. And I'm not sure I would definitively identify. It's a bit like, you know, when they said we haven't actually been able to separate the virus off the COVID and isolate it. It's a similar sort of principle. How do you identify the key ingredients of what it is to be a bona fide Jew? We know there's lots of stories around it, but what I've just said really identifies the problem over centuries, millennia even. How do we conceive the integrity of a race, or there's also a religion and a faith? Not clear to me.
Well, for me, it's where we get the persons coming in. God has no respect of persons, so He doesn't care about all the ethnic, religious purities. What you're talking about, the scriptures say what a Jew is. If you're a born again believer in Christ, you are a Jew and you are Israel. It's that simple. I'll go with that. That's the word of God. So any Jew and Gentile are Israel. So if you're born again and you're circumcised of the heart, you're a Jew. If you just so happen to have been circumcised of the flesh because of your ethnicity, you're no special, you're no different a Jew than me. That's what the scriptures say. So let's stick with that baseline, Alex.
Yeah.
Taylor, do you want to pass a comment on that before? Well, I'm presuming you've got something for us. I know we're running short on time, but I'm sure you can cram something in for your fan base.
Yeah. Just let me pull something up here. Okay. Oh man. Well, this is it's going to be a bit of a what's the word I'm looking for? This will be about a bit of a historical topic, but not completely historical, as it's also modern day as well. So I feel like this is something important to keep in mind as we talk about Israel and all that. And that is, and I actually did not know about this until a few days ago, which is first off, yeah, there we go. All right, Irving Kristol. I mean, no, not Irving Kristol. It was Norman Podhoretz is officially. I say officially because most likely he's been kept. Most likely he died a while ago, though. You know, who knows. But Norman Podhoretz, the literary lion of neoconservatism, dies at 95. A New York intellectual and one-time liberal stalwart, his commentary magazine became his platform as his political and social views turned sharply rightward, quote-unquote. Podhoretz influenced Republican foreign policy for about 30 years. Here we go, another one. Heads up, Satan, incoming. Until catching the Times headline, the editorial board of the anti-New York Times hadn't realized that this warmongering POS Norman Podhoretz, pronounced Poo-Doretz, I like that, by the way, was still kicking. Who was he? Some of you more recently awakened might ask. Well, Podhoretz was one of the leading thinkers, quote-unquote, and rolling eyes, and founders of the subversive Jewish political movement known as neoconservatism. Neoconservatism originated in the early 1970s and really blossomed at the start of the Reagan Revolution in circa 1980. The original neocons consisted mainly of self-professed quote-unquote ex-Marxists and libtards who, mostly during the presidency of demon rat Jimmy Carter, suddenly and almost in unison claimed to have realized their political errors and wished to now embrace American conservatism and quote-unquote anti-communism ideologies most personified at the time by Ronald Reagan. The first major New York City quote-unquote intellectual to quote-unquote come out as a neocon was Irving Kristol, father of William Kristol of Peenack, New Pearl Harbor infamy. Kristol explained his shocking conversion in a 1979 article, Confessions of a Self-Confessed Neoconservative. As for Podhoretz, in the magazine which he edited, Commentary, he soon followed, as did his wife, Midge Decter, gullible traditional conservatives eager to shed that dreaded smear label of anti-Semitism, which, by the way, let me just add in this that anti-Semitism label really took on a life of its own especially after Israel became a country in 1948 and after the so-called quote-unquote Holocaust. That's a whole different story. Welcome to the media hype infiltrators with open arms into their academic and journalistic circles. With the sheep-dipping help of the Judean press, which, surprisingly, or not so surprisingly, treated these neocon scholars with great respect. It wasn't long before these ex-Marxists, quote-unquote, and a Trojan horse hijacked true conservatism and steered it, as was intended, in a different and deadly direction. So, here's a quote by Digital Georgetown. Yesterday's liberalism is today's conservatism, the Jewish roots of neoconservatism as shown by the rise and evolution of Commentary. And then here's a bunch of faces that you all may or may not be familiar with. Those of you who those of you who only woke up after COVID might not know. But these were some of the leading guys of the neoconservative movement. These were the same guys that gave us 9/11. Other warmongering Reagan-era neocons left to right: Irving Kristol, Nathan Glazer, Richard Pearl, Paul Wolfowitz, Douglas Fife, and Goy Shiksta Hor John Kirkpatrick. Presented as great intellectuals to conservative normies, the sum total of their scholarship, when stripped of its quote-unquote right-wing veneer, consisted only of threatening war or demanding war upon any nation state targeted by the terrorists of Tel Aviv. In reality, the Jewish neocons and their many Goy minions were nothing but the same old globalists who differed from other liberal globalists in two key ways: one ideology and one logistically. One, whereas Bilderberg/Trilateral Commission globalists like Jimmy Carter and his handler Zbigniew Brzezinski had no special love or loyalty for the shitty little state in the Middle East, which they viewed as an obstacle to getting Arabs on board with the New World Order, the neocon globalists were hardcore Israel-first Zionists whose hawkish foreign policy toward the Soviet Union was never due to any actual threat to the United States. No, these greaseballs only hated the Soviet Union/Russia because the Arab-friendly regime in Moscow would not bend to the aggressive will of the shitty little state. Get it? 2. Whereas Bilderberger/Trilateral Commission globalists always prefer to use soft power, proxy wars, and color revolutions to subvert/remove disobedient regimes around the world, impatient neocons have always advocated for direct war. Globalists play chess. Neocons prefer smash-mouth football, spilling the blood of American military personnel to carry out the mass killing overseas, of course. And I'll give a bit of an example for this. So, after World War II, when the CIA and all these other intelligence agencies were created, the globalist crowd, they gained the ability to be able to subvert countries from within without having to go to an overt war, which is what we saw in the 50s and into the 60s, and then so on and so forth, with all these different movements in different countries. Then later on we get George Soros and all of these tax exempt foundations. These are what we call the soft powers. The power to be able to conduct regime change and destroy a country from within without a single shot being fired. Usually by infiltrating the schools and going and brainwashing the students, especially the college students. And then when they grow up, they turn into libtarded Marxists who go and take over the professions and usually move the country leftward and towards the New World Order. That's usually always been their preferred method, because selling a hard war like is always difficult, and they always prefer against it, because the war can go badly, as it did in Iraq in the 2000s under Bush, or it could end up costing so much money that also sets them back years. So at the end of the day, they prefer soft power. Now the neocons, these Israel firsters, the Zionist crowd, they love their war, because they're impatient bastards. So at the end of the day, it's a difference in ideology rather. But continuing,
This Times article explains itself. Quote, Fedoritz occasionally spoke to Mr. Reagan by phone, but ever the contrarian, he also listened to the president for, in his view, not being tough enough in taking on the Soviet Union and defending Israel. Fedoritz alienated some Jewish admirers in the 1990s when he attacked Yitzhak Rabin, then the Prime Minister of Israel, for engaging in peace talks with the Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat. Mr. Fedoritz had previously urged Jews to silence their criticism of Israeli policies. In 2004, Mr. Bush awarded Mr. Fedoritz the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor. 3 years later, he urged Mr. Bush to bomb Iran's nuclear facilities, which the president did not do. And I've talked about this, and if you recall, I've talked about the whole Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin, as well as Bill Clinton situation that happened in the late 90s. What happened with them when they tried to settle peace over there in that region of the world? It didn't go so well for them. Moving on, though. The bloodthirsty Christoph Fedoritz Mafia eventually captured the Republican Party, reaching the apex of its power during the Bush-Cheney administration and their glorious Sayanam, this is talking about Mossad, assisted false flag of 9/11. For this devious bunch of Mossad partners, everything centered around blowing up the Middle East for the sake of greater Israel. Thankfully, neoconservatives, who mostly backed either Jeb Bush or Marco Rubio for president in 2016, have been ruthlessly purged from both the Republican Party and fake conservative media by Commander Trump and the Q operation behind him. And Master Troll Trump neutralized this powerful weapon of Zion while publicly professing his love for the shitty little state. Fedoritz is dead. When he actually died, we don't know. And so is neocondom. Rot in hell, Norman, and trust the plan. Editor's note: though neocons, aka Never Trumpers, generally despise Trump, Fedoritz endorsed Trump in 2020. Was he under submission? Switched out? Who knows? And then last bit here: the fruits of Fedoritz neoconservatism from the article. The Fedoritz doctrine reached its influential peak in the administration of President George W. Bush. Admirers of Mr. Fedoritz have become shapers of administration policy and successfully pushed for an invasion of Iraq, for which initial justifications turned out to be faulty. They followed that with a largely aborted effort to democratize the Middle East. For Israel First conservatives tried to derail the Trump train in 2016. It led to their own demise and essential banishment from Trump's Republican Party. And there's just some headlines. So, in a nutshell, bye-bye neocons and mostly, and hopefully, we can at least see some of these people put on trial, because let's be real here, these people have been have been some of the biggest traitors to this country for decades. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just like these are the same guys that hijack conservatism for the Israel First agenda. And of course, we know 9/11 truth is coming out. So by logical extension, that should also mean that neoconservatism has to come out too, or at least the people linked to it. Not just the Jews, but also the goy minions like Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, etc.
Yeah. Well, the characters that you were displaying there, especially, the pearls and stuff like that with 9/11, all with the same star of Remphan. So again, the question is still, which Jews are these? If we've got Jews bragging that Vladimir Putin's very friendly to them and they have all this sway in Russia, and we know that there's a big sway in the US Congress for dual nationality, we do see a common denominator. And if this is part of a plan that you were saying, it's all the more pertinent that we need to keep putting the spotlight on these. So thanks, it joined in pretty well with a bit of historical background, that pal. Have you got anything in summing up, Taylor? I know you came on late, but I always know you've got something, so you might fit it in. But do you want to sum some of that up for yourself, as well as addressing the Putin thing?
Well, first of all, let me ask: when was that video? When was that speech given?
I don't know, mate. Just comment on what you've seen.
Well, it's important because that whole Jewish oligarchy connection with Putin that died out years ago. All those oligarchs fled Russia over the last couple of decades progressively as Putin gained more and more power. Just like there's a whole story there with the whole battle internal battle in
So
Russia.
there's no influence in Russia from those people whatsoever. No.
Absolutely not. No.
Okay.
Let me put it to you like this. At first, when Putin came, I'll make it short and sweet. When Putin first came to power in 2000, the guy was weak. He couldn't do anything. He had no power. Just like when Hitler came to power in 1933 or when Trump came to power in 2017. You can have a good man that wants to do good things in there, but if they don't have power and they don't even have control of their own party, what are you supposed to do? So, in Putin's case, he bid his time. He pretended to be friendly with the West. He didn't call out 9/11. He didn't call out Bush's nonsense in Iraq because you have to play ball, just like how Trump had to play ball with Israel. Nowadays, however, because Putin has gained so much power, keep your enemies, keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer. Now he's able to subvert these bastards, and most of them, if not all of them, have left Russia. Or they've been taken prisoner. And by the way, I just want to mention that most of those oligarchs that left Russia, most of them went to Israel. How fitting. And the ones that didn't came to the United States, so or the UK. So at the end of the day, it's just like, yeah. And of course, their typical argument is, oh, persecution, anti-Semitism, blah 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 blah. Oh, Putin's a dictator, blah blah blah. That whole nonsense. So. There's a whole book on that. If you're interested in checking out that subject, it's called The War Against Putin. I definitely recommend reading it. It explains the whole history of the Russian Empire's relationship with the global establishment and the Zionists, going back even before the days of the Soviet Union to the days of the Russian Tsar Empire back in the 1800s.
Putin good, Putin bad.
Putin good.
Putin good.
Absolutely. I am a huge fan of Vladimir Putin. Now, is he perfect? No human is perfect, obviously. But yeah, he's good. Absolutely. Don't believe any of this BS about dictator, blah 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 blah. That's what they usually.
Well, Trump. You obviously think Trump's good. So Trump good, Putin good. Trump and Putin friends.
Oh, absolutely. They've been friends the whole time. The ironic thing is, they shamed the establishment shamed Trump for colluding with Putin in 26, 17, 18 over that Russia hoax. The ironic thing is, while they were wrong, of course they were lying about the whole Russian stealing the election nonsense. The ironic thing is that they were right that Trump was colluding with Putin, and that but they were colluding for the good to take down the New World Order. So that's the ironic thing about that. And it's the same thing with Xi Jinping in China as well. So at the end of the day, you have and there's more as well, but these are like the three big powers, of course. So those are the three.
Are the Zionists in control of anything?
Absolutely not anymore. No.
So what we've just seen with Netanyahu and all that, and the Jews who are claiming that they have these influences and the dual nationalities, that's all just make believe then.
It's all to expose themselves to the public because they weren't this open before. Think about imagine if Philip Zelikow, when he was announced to run the 9/11 Commission, 2002, 2003, 4, whatever. Imagine if he would have come out and said, "I am a dual Israeli citizen. I am Jewish and hold citizenship in the United States and Israel." That's what's going on today. But you would have never heard that if this was all real. You would have never heard that because they're not that stupid. So at the end of the day, you can't tell people. You got to show them.
Well, I think the plot is definitely thickening. Thanks for coming on, Taylor. I didn't know if you was going to make it because you'd not seen any of the messages in the group this week, so I didn't know if you were busy. But thanks for making time, my friend, and hopefully speak through the week. But if not, I'll see you hopefully next Sunday, God willing.
Yeah, no problem. And thanks for everyone for tuning in. Please, let me just promote myself a little bit because I can. Please subscribe to my Rumble account. Please subscribe to my YouTube page, and please give some positive feedback if possible. And with that, thanks again, Webby, for having me on, and I'll see you all next time next week.
No worries, Taylor. You're always welcome. Good night. God bless, sir.
God bless, man.
Cheers, Taylor.
What have you got for us in wrapping up, Alex? Can you encapsulate this evening?
Good question. Yes.
Strokes his beard.
It's a tough one. Strokes beard for inspiration. Well, what we can say is it's the shortest day of the year, even though it's still 24 hours. But in terms of it's the shortest amount of, or least amount of daylight, which we know from a pagan perspective was seized upon to create a story about light and dark, which is reflected with Christmas trees. They're evergreen light sources that get put on trees. And the thing is, these here pagans, they've still got stories about light and darkness. It's just their understanding of darkness and light is different than our understanding of darkness and light. And I think when we look at all traditions, particularly when we're coming up to what will obviously happen in 4 days' time, it'll be Christmas Day. Some Christians will be completely oblivious and think it's completely legit. There's not an issue. It's the day that Jesus was born, and they don't ask any questions. And they have a Christmas card mentality about Christmas. And yet those who are more, should we say, detached or skeptical about that claim. But yet both of those Christian camps, radically different though they may be, would not agree with the pagan theology if they were confronted and said, do you believe in a pagan worldview? And yet one of those Christian camps is embracing that as a part of culture, not really questioning it. And it just goes to show that at this time of year, we know that festivities are starting for people. So regardless of the truth that we try and dig into, we try to get to the bedrock and what is the foundation of truth, and we say, we want to be scriptural. The bottom line is, at the end of the day, there are certain things which bind us together as human beings, even when our metaphysical positions are at odds. Light and dark. Jung talks about that. You started with a Jung video. Light and dark. It's just the way we portray light and dark. What's the nature of the battle? And that's just in spiritual terms or religious terms. That doesn't even bring the geopolitical in. Some people think that what's happening in Israel, just to keep it topical, is that, the nation state of Israel is perpetrating gross evil and suffering against Palestinians. And others take the exactly opposite view. So who people think is on the side of light and who people think is on the side of dark is completely at variance. So everyone's going to continue to disagree about that. But one thing we can say is at this time of year, whether you're a pagan or you're a Christian or you're anywhere else in between or completely atheistic, there's an opportunity for people to reflect in this season over the holidays when they're off work, and as they approach the new year, what do I want my story to be? Do I actually want there to be win-win situations for human beings, or am I kind of okay with the win-lose? And yeah, of course, we're all going to bring it back to our core values, our core convictions, our core beliefs, and maybe that makes people bigoted at times, but without becoming a pure humanitarian, we've got to remember that we do all bleed the same, we do all suffer the same, and there is something about our common humanity that should be taken Seriously, so all I'd say is at this time of year, regardless of what camp you're in, hold on here. Let's just listen to this. All right, I thought I'd missed something. Circumspect. I didn't know what that meant. So yeah, regardless of what camp you're in, you know, we'll wish everybody seasons, greetings, whatever you want to make of that, right? And here's an opportunity now over the holidays to reflect on what your values and priorities are going to be next year, and whether you are just going to sit there as an armchair spectator, watching it pass by, being a voyeur, or are you actually going to step up and do something about it on whatever level that is?
I think there's a lot of people stepping up in regards to the legislative things, I should say, that are happening here, but it's all been provoked by media. I mean, you know, like we said earlier on in the show, that they're expecting that our sons and daughters are going to go and fight on the front line against Russia. Are you mad? In what world does that make sense? But you know, they're provoking this to an end. You know, we talked about that spirit, that mental, and the reality that it's all creating. Well, what about when all those things come together, Alex? Is there a Vesica Pisces in the middle of all that? That's the perfect eye of the storm, where you've got knowledge of everything and you can see everything and can even interact on all kinds of levels. But when you're being in the vortex and you're being pulled into one of the other areas more so than being balanced, and we're born that way. You know, it's oscillating not evenly. You're not in the middle of anything. It's oscillating abnormally. It's on a wobble. You know, a bit like they told us about our spinning ball. We're on a wobble, mate. As well as spinning at 1,000 miles an hour, we do it on a wobble as well. So maybe it's that oscillating factor of the spiritual, and bearing in mind these were further apart, but as time's speeding up, these have got to now start interacting, and maybe that's when we start to see things like the tribulation coming in, where we're going to see some things that we've never seen before. We've got various programs and films and stuff over the last 80 years or so that have depicted futuristic things. Well, if you've got an idea of what the future is, you can start not only predicting it, but feeding it to people to accept it on a real base level. Just accept it that is plausible. You know, it's easy to fool people. It's more difficult to show people that they've been fooled. You know, it's when you're fooled. You know, I was going to do George Bush's famous quote: "Fool me once, but if you can be fooled, but when you get new information, you shouldn't get fooled again, because you've just been given information. You won't get me with that again. If you got with that again, then you didn't get the information the first time. So it creates that problem, and mixing it in with no critical thought, and again that willingness to be a sheep in so many areas. You know, we just accept things that people have told us because they've done it a bit longer than us. They've read a little bit more. You know, I understand and speak fluent Koine Greek, so I understand the scripture better than you. You know that type of stuff wouldn't be true if that was said. If it was, I've been studying with scholars for 30 years and you can't ask a question because I've just got to accept it. It can't be done, Alex. We've got to be able to pick this scripture up ourselves and read it for ourselves. But if you can't pick up legislation and understand that the legislation is against you and that it's because of how you have been taught to act, and you can't stop yourself acting that way, and you're going to defend that, then it's Stockholm syndrome, and we're just defending our abusers yet again at the end of the day. And again, we a couple of shows back, Carl Jung was talking about that persona. When you're born, you put a persona on, you build it up through all your mental and your spiritual structures, including your traumas and all that, and your chinks in your armor, and you think, this is me. And then, the first arrow comes, and then, oh, bloody hell, that's not me. Oh, who am I now? And as soon as you realise that there's nothing left, and I'm bullet naked here, and nobody else can see you bullet naked, so you say, listen, I'm naked because I've heard that you shouldn't be paying for your gas. Well, he's a knobhead, he's naked. It's easy to ridicule. It's I think it comes down to humility, and like I said before, sometimes most of us need to be humbled to feel that humility, to say, do you know what, maybe I don't quite know everything that I should know, and maybe some of the stuff that I do know isn't good for me. Who knows, eh?
Persona is a contract, Paul.
Exactly.
That's basically what it is, and basically you've got to decide whether you want to be authentic and bust out of that. It's like when we go out in the world, we wear clothing because it's considered indecent to walk around naked. I mean, naturists try it, don't they? And they have the communities, but generally speaking, it's not accepted. If you could be that transparent, as a metaphor, it's a nice idea about us being transparent and authentic and who we are. It would help us to deal with a lot of our fears. But we put these barriers up. We put sometimes armor on to protect ourselves. And the thing about that is, if you project a persona out into the world, you will be operating in the world of contracts. You will be in a transactional mode. It's extremely costly, even in intimate relationships, to make yourself vulnerable to another person, even on the human level. But the great thing about God is, once you acknowledge that you are fully known and you can't hide, first that's quite intimidating. Oh dear, I can't hide. There's nowhere to hide. Adam and Eve tried to hide in the trees. Once you realize that's futile, to be seen is to be known, and it's liberating. If you can say, actually, this is who I am and I'm accepted. Most people are fighting battles on a psychological level with non-acceptance in their relationships, in their relationship history, right across the board, in their family of origin. They've not been accepted. They've been relegated. There's been sibling rivalries. They've never got past that level of pain. And then you have a God who says, I created you. I see you. It doesn't matter what defense mechanisms and methods that you use to try and make yourself not seen. It doesn't matter how much you try and hide in the trees. The point is, it liberates you to be seen. Yeah, it's scary at first, but God knows everything anyway. Prepare to be seen, and then there's nothing to worry about. There really isn't. It's scary at first, and there's no way to be authentic, fully authentic, if you can't go to that place. And that's where it all changes, because then, once you know you're fully seen and accepted, you can offer to be fully visible to another person, and you can offer to see them without judgment. But until you get to that point, people are playing games, they're shadow boxing, they're settling for contracts instead of covenants. And unless they make a decision to change, then Jesus won't be of any use to them, because they won't see the need to be cleansed. They won't see the need to live differently. They won't be prepared to acknowledge what their pain is doing to them, because basically on that level, we're all self-harmers, and that's what we need to put right.
And the church isn't telling them that they are doing anything wrong. They're congratulating them on being good people. So we've got so much that's going on. And when you were talking about that persona, it's like getting all that armor that bolsters all those personas. It's getting it all chipped off you to the point where you are born again, where you forget, where you put everything that you've had in that old life away. You put it all away because it was given to you. How do you know that any of that's true? You don't. Yet we'll defend it to the hilt that it's true. You know, we've had the debate about fundamental facts and what the truth is. There's only one truth. And I think we say it every week what that truth is. The way, the truth, the life. It's the only way out of this fallen world. and everything that teaches you everything about the world says that's false, that's wrong. I think we've got ourselves a good rock to build our foundation on, Alex. Anyway, thanks to everybody in the chat room, all of you that listened live and got through it with us. Only a few minor technical difficulties, thankfully, tonight. But if you've made it this far, then hopefully you've at least learned to ask a few questions about things and not just accept everything that's given to us as, you know, this is the truth, this is verbatim, go and check it out yourself. Unless you go and read what we talk about, you can have an opinion on it. Everybody's entitled to it. I'm told it all the time. But if your information's not great, then your opinion ends up at some point not being valid anymore. Anyway, God willing, see you next week, guys. Good night. God bless.
All right.